everybody. Welcome back to the Everyday Night. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jeff.
And Jeff, I thought tonight I came across some articles on something called the friendship recession.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
And
interesting.
I thought it's worth exploring this topic.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I think
Um,
we I think we've got some we are bucking a trend a little bit, I think, or have for years bucked the trend
yeah.
that you're talking about. But yeah.
So before we begin,
Yes, sir.
what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking um a glass of something that someone left here after a party. Um it's a shout out to Chad Burns, who we know as Monster.
Mhm.
Duncan the Monster, and it is from his or the distillery where he is one of the distillers, um, Indiana whiskey,
Oh, okay.
and this is a Confections of a Chocoholic bourbon, and it doesn't have it's a just kind of a nice sweet bourbon. It's got a very faint chocolatey aftertaste, but it's mostly just a nice mellow kind of bourbon.
Is that from the toast of the barrels, or do they
I
add something to it, or
I have no idea if there's
interesting?
actually chocolate added. I don't think I talked to him about it at the
Okay.
time. It was just left over and in my cabinet, so I thought
Nice.
I'd try it, and it's not too bad.
I find a good bourbon pairs very nicely with dark chocolate.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
all
In
right.
fact,
I'll
I
have to try
found
it.
some dark chocolate raspberry um almonds
Hmm.
that were really good and went well with bourbon because there's the dark chocolate that's not too sweet and the raspberry that's sweet, but then the almond that
Hmm.
it worked well together. So
Interesting. I have some. I had some dark chocolate. I'm not sure. It might be all gone. And what, pray tell, are you drinking, sir?
I have this is Redbreast Irish Whiskey Lustow edition. So it's finished in Lustow sherry
Hmm.
casks.
It's got a very nice golden color to
Yeah,
it.
it's I really like it. Irish whiskeys I find I've been tending more towards Irish whiskeys than Scotch whiskey these days because there's something that's sweeter. It's a different process,
Hmm.
not as peaty. I like it, and this is the one I usually use in one of my go-to cocktails, which is called an artist's special that I've had
Yes.
before.
Yep.
So here's to you.
Your health.
Mhm. And to friendship, since that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Always happy to drink to friendship.
yes. So the article that um, I mentioned um,
You put a
indicated,
link, you put a link in the comments.
yes, I can do that. Um, and I found articles in um, a number of different sources that
Hmm.
confirm this. So that the percentage of men with at least six close friends fell by half since 1990, from
Hmm.
55% to 27%. And this was a Survey Center on American Life study. The study also found the percentage of men without any close friends jumped from 3% to 15% in that
Oh,
time
that's
frame.
significant. Yeah.
Yeah, and the single men are worse, wor the worst in this.
Hmm.
One in five American men who are unmarried and not in a more romantic relationship report not having any close friends.
Hmm.
Um, and
Well, I've been convinced for years that people only hang out with me because of the women I'm with.
um, well, I mean, it would be rude of me to contradict you.
Yeah, of course.
um, I think that the reasons in this and other articles are um, decline in church attendance, uh,
Hmm.
working from home, um, the online gaming,
Right.
online other online activities, um, and also a decline in what's known as the third space or third place,
Right. Right.
which would be another place people would go outside of home, which is first space, outside of work, which is second space, because each of those have ways of talking, relating to people. The third space would be the coffee shop, interestingly, because Howard Schultz, when he created Starbucks, that was the original the original branding, the original idea, the concept was not just a place to pick up a coffee and go, but a third space that you could
Right.
go to socialize. You could go sit and read. You could go. But when I've been to Starbucks and a lot of other coffee shops now that emulate that model, there's a sometimes you'll see people ones and twos talking, but it's like business meetings,
Hmm.
and you'll see people on their laptops or studying
Yeah,
or
by themselves.
by themselves. So people are going there and remaining isolated. And I remember I read an article, and I think it's related in a way that people used to, in situations where they would strike up conversations with people, now
Right.
they pull out their phones and just
Yes.
look at their phones. And I started looking around when I was in a public place and looking around and looking at how many people are just looking at their phones. And it was not surprising, but kind of shocking because it was how can I be shocked but not surprised? It was it was most people were there.
Yeah.
There people
Yeah.
weren't talking to each other. There was just even in a public space, a third space, people were still isolated. So decline in third spaces, decline in church involvement, decline in other social activities. I don't have statistics on like bowling leagues or company
Right.
softball teams or things like that. Things that people used to do that were social. People used to make friends at work. I don't know that that's true anymore. Um, so
Yeah.
there's a number of reasons for this. And I think the effect of this goes beyond simply the lack of friendships. I think the lack of social contacts and social support systems has a lot of other effects.
Oh, I'm sure it does. And the feeling of isolation and compounded by being fed a curated online ideology,
Yes.
I think contributes greatly to that sort of feeling of isolation. And I think that we become afraid of, or some people become afraid of expanding. For, the stranger is really a danger now to people.
Yeah.
They don't know. We are taught fear from the time we're children now. Don't talk. When we were kids, I mean, yeah, you don't talk to strangers when we were kids, but if you needed help, you went to an adult,
Yeah.
right? Now you don't. You just don't. Children are taught not you don't unless you know them, you don't talk to them. They are bad.
Unless you know they know the code word or
Well, yeah, but I think it's more of a,
yeah, just
if you don't know that person and you don't, and that person knows mom or dad, that you're taught to be actually
yeah,
afraid of them.
which is interesting because it's my understanding, and I'd have to confirm this with data because it's been a while since I looked at this kind of information, but that crimes against children, which is what parents
Right.
cautioning their children against, are generally not done by strangers. It's
Right.
generally by a family friend, clergy, um, somebody else, relation, something like that. And
Yeah,
so,
but I wonder how that statistic is affected by the fact that children aren't allowed to and are
oh yeah,
discouraged from interact. I mean,
so these are the people who have access,
yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah, that's true. Unintended consequence, but um, so there are other effects, uh, effect on voting too. In the trends in young men, Gen Z men, there's a huge swing in their voting habits, um, uh, and their sources of information too. People don't. Um, when I was just coming into voting age and being, I mean, even as a teenager and then early in voting age, I read newspapers, I
Yeah.
watched TV news. I found there was no internet. I was an avid consumer of news and information, um, and critically thinking about news sources. And I've asked students before where you get your news. And it's online, TikTok, Instagram,
Right. Yeah.
social
Instagram of all
media,
places.
uh, and I think it's also podcasts. Hey,
Podcast.
yeah. So, so so what places are there? What places remain? If people used to make friends at work, but
Well, I
now
think,
if they're only going into work a couple days a week, because now some people are
right.
working with people every day, but you're not necessarily making friends, you're working
Well, you're not working and then going out for a
a
drink or
drink
something afterward.
afterwards and socializing or, you know, um, um, so yeah. Um,
But I think, besides that, I mean, that's an obvious uh, circumstance where we have right now. But I think that all those places still exist. It's just that there's competition that comes right into your home now.
yeah, yeah,
Online gaming, you know, social media. You don't have to stir from your couch to get entertainment and get, something feeding into you. Whereas our parents' generation, that, you got off of work and you could watch the three channels that were on television.
yeah,
But if you wanted to talk to another adult or have a conversation with somebody besides your spouse, you went to a neighborhood cocktail party or you went to your the parents' lodge that you belong
right,
to
right.
or something like that. Um, and now I think those things
Even
are still there.
Ralph Cramden and Ed Norton
Yeah,
were
the water, but no,
what? No, that Water Buffaloes, that
it was
was
a
as the
Fred and
Flintstones.
Barney. Yeah, but it
Really,
was
Fred
like
and
that.
Barney are the same as Ralph and Ed. So I mean, it's
Yeah,
the same
were
thing, but
they weren't. What were they? Were they just were they
it was
moose?
maybe I don't remember. Uh,
No.
I've told you this before that the honeymooners bothered me because of the
Yeah.
relationship between. In fact, all of those, the honeymooners, the the Flintstones, even the Jets, and all of those bothered me because the husband and Lucy, great comedy, great comedy stuff, but always disturbed me as a kid because Lucy and Desi were often lying to each other.
Yeah,
So, so that bothered me because I didn't think that was good, even as a kid. So, um, but yeah, people would belong to social organizations. A and you people will still try to do that, but if it's not a social organization, if it's a somebody posted, well, I tried, I went to a class to learn French and enjoyed the class, but afterwards everybody left and
right.
back
Yeah.
to, so
Well, that's kind of a purpose-driven,
it's an activity.
activity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't sit there as a group and talk. You sit and you listen to an instructor and you all, you know, I don't know how modern, you know, language classes are taught, but my supposition is only that you sit in a desk and you watch a teacher and the teacher gives you lessons and you repeat the lessons and you learn. It
I,
may be more interactive than that these days, but
yeah, I think it is. It can be, but it takes a certain amount of ability to communicate in the language to be able to do that.
right.
Um, I yeah. Um, One of the things that and this goes to back to a previous episode when we talked about optimism. Um, I, when I'm out in public, I try to be friendly
Yeah,
and
sure.
outgoing.
Likewise.
And we were somewhere. We were in a we're in a gelateria, an ice cream store, and specifically gelato, and really good. And we were leaving, and there was a man there, really well dressed, very well put together. So I turned to him, I said, "Sir, you are very well put together. That's a exceptionally well thought out
Hmm.
presentation." And he got up, he shook my hands, he said, "Thank you. I make an effort to do so." I said, well done. And it was just a simple, brief exchange, but I will compliment people when
Yeah.
I see them doing something that's good. It seems now so many people only feel they feel the license to criticize other people, but they're not necessarily looking to compliment other people or be nice or make somebody's day, you know?
Yeah, I recall a time I was at, I think it was a Home Depot, and there was um, a young black woman standing at the end of her aisle, kind of waiting to help people, right? That stationing herself to let people know that she was an open cashier, right?
Hmm.
So, but she had this very interesting kente cloth head wrap on. It was lovely, and I just said, "Oh, is that like a genuine kente pattern?" And and she said, and I kept my distance. I didn't like
Yeah.
walk up to her, get in her space. As I was walking by, and I never really stopped walking. I just pointed to it and I said, that looks great. Is that an actual authentic kente
Mhm.
thing?" And she said, "Oh yeah, yeah." And I said, "It looks terrific. Nice job." And I just never stopped walking
Yeah.
and kept going. But she was grinning
Yeah.
ear to ear and looked, like you said, looked like I had made her day.
Yeah.
And it
And
takes so little to do that for somebody
right.
who's at work and maybe under some kind of pressure to do something. And
And I think that I mean, I've done that even if I've been online with somebody, a
hmm,
customer service person. I'll talk to them and I say, how's your day going? Because that's an awful job. I would not want to do that job.
yeah,
They get a lot of abuse, and usually people only call when they got a problem, and I had something I needed dealt with. And I thank them for trying to help me, and um, and that by itself doesn't solve
no, we
the
didn't make friends.
friends, but it it I think that attitude And the making someone's day for them and for you may make it easier to make friends too.
Yeah.
And it that takes effort. It takes practice to get to a point to being comfortable doing that,
Well, sure.
particularly if you're not an outgoing kind of person.
And
Uh,
I think that um, it's more important these days, I should say, maybe to develop the skill of complimenting somebody without um,
Coming on to them
disrupting their.
without coming on to them
Well,
without,
or and it doesn't have to be a woman. I mean, even a guy.
well, yeah, my point still,
Oh well, okay. All right. Um, yeah, where it's just a compliment. You aren't whereas you aren't asking anything of them.
right.
I mean, then I think that's what's important. You're not saying, oh, you should smile. No, no. That, yeah, I bet you'd be really pretty if you smiled. That kind of bullshit
Yeah,
is not the way to go. You're just offering a thing with, and I think doing it sort of in passing.
yeah,
If you're not actually being introduced to somebody, where
right.
if you just see someone and you feel compelled, or take note of something in their appearance or what they're doing or whatever, and you
Hmm.
take a second to compliment them, really doing it in passing, where I'm not interrupting your day. I'm not trying to take any of your time. I just wanted to pass this positive thing on to you and hope it brightens your day.
Yeah,
And I'm gone and we never have to see each other again.
right. Um, I've struck up conversations with people on airplanes,
Yeah.
and I've had some really interesting conversations on airplanes. Um, but that doesn't, how often does that happen? There's also something, you're familiar with the two beers and a puppy test.
Yes.
So this is something a writer named Ross McCammon came up with.
Hmm.
A test he developed about how you actually feel about somebody. Ask yourself, would you have two beers with this person? Would you allow this person to look after your puppy over a weekend?
Right.
And he said, some people are no and no. These people are to be avoided at all costs.
Yeah.
Some people are yes and no. They're fun. They're fun, but they wouldn't necessarily
Not
trust.
particularly trustworthy.
Right. Some
Yeah.
people are no and yes. They're no fun, but they're trustworthy. They make the world better.
They're responsible
Um,
at least.
yes. And some people are yes and yes. And those are people you should seek out. So brought that up because it might be that people, when maybe they don't know who to look for in a friend either.
Hmm.
Um, Now, we both belong to, as we mentioned many times, the Society for Creative Anachronism,
Yes.
which is a medieval reenactment organization, and have made lots of friends through that. Um, and people who, I'll just give one example because it's a network.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've moved different places around the country, and there was immediately, because there are branches of the organization everywhere, there was immediately a group of people who we had something in common with,
Right.
who we could talk to, get to know, introduce ourselves to, and become friends with. Uh, and that is in a lot of ways like some of the larger social organizations, the Elks, the
The Masons, the
Masons.
Eagles, the
Yeah,
Mooses.
right.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that but it went somewhat beyond that when after my mom passed away, some time had passed, and my sister and I needed to empty out my mom's house. She hadn't lived
Mhm.
there in a while because she'd been ill. And uh, I called the local group there because that's where I had started. And I called the local group, contacted the local group and said, I really need your help. And it was like a dozen, 2 dozen people came
Oh
out
yeah, sure.
and carted out the house, emptied it out. I rented um, what do you call it? Disposal bin
Yeah, 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 yeah.
thing, um,
Dumpster.
dumpster that things went into. Why couldn't I think of dumpster? And I had a trailer and got some stuff in the trailer and took a storage. And I took everybody out for pizza and beer,
Right.
and which they kept insisting wasn't necessary. And they were glad to do it. And shout outs to the Barony of Whitewaters. Thank you again. I will always be grateful. Um, what a, it's what a gift to be able to
Yeah.
belong to a group that um, has such people in it, but also, I mean, the very basis of this podcast is about the chivalric virtues, which is the foundation of the organization anyway.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but how many people could call on even one person to help them move or carry something or say, hey, you've got the truck, I've got the garbage bags, the rope, and the 50-pound bag of lye and a couple of shovels, you know.
Well, is that the joke that you, a a friend will help you move? A real friend will help you move a body.
Yeah.
And I've had
Disclaimer purely for humor, right?
yeah, I have never moved a body by myself. At any rate,
I have found some bodies quite moving.
oh, okay, very good.
Okay. Yeah.
There, I remember moving, a former girlfriend and I moved, and we just put out a sort of a general call, and
Yeah.
yeah, like 15 people showed up. We
Yeah.
emptied a 1,500 square foot apartment and moved it to another house in about 2 hours.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. Um,
One big truck and a bunch of people. We were literally bucket brigading stuff
yeah.
from one apartment into the truck.
And these are people I would have pizza and beer with. I
Right.
wouldn't necessarily trust every one of them with a puppy,
No, right, sure.
but some of them I would. And in fact, years ago, we adopted a cat, great, great cat, older cat, um, but her owner had passed away. And so the person who was a friend of that passed word through the organization, friend to friend to friend, this network. So it ended up, Claudia, the
No.
cat, ended up with us. Great cat. Old, but um, the other cats would not give her any crap. We had a younger male cat, and he was started harassing her, and she hauled off and smacked him across the nose. She fell over doing it. She was kind of frail, but drew blood, and he would never bother her again. Um, but that sort of thing, they would trust us with a kitten,
Right.
a cat. Um, so, um,
Well, I think I've said,
but
oh,
what other social organizations are there that people could find? It does take some effort to get out of your comfort zone, get off your couch and socialize.
well, even within our SCA, both of us have huge circles of acquaintance.
Yes.
Um, I wouldn't consider all of them friends
Yeah.
necessarily,
Yeah.
um, but certainly someone you can walk up to and have a conversation with, you know.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and I've said multiple times that, and probably on this podcast, that for me the SCA serves me as church. What a lot of people get out of church is what I get out of the SCA.
Yeah, certainly church was a lot of what church functioned as was community and
Right.
still does for people who attend. But as I mentioned, attendance has been dropping.
Well,
Um,
church provides not just community.
right.
Um, it provides ritual and ceremony that helps bind the community, but
Yes.
the necessary the the ritual and ceremony in and of itself is necessary
Yes.
to the human creature. So
Which, and we also have ritual ceremony.
we'll make a ceremony out of any damn thing.
And and those mark time too.
Yes,
So that
the bigger ceremonies.
yes, you can say, oh, was I don't remember what year it was, but it was during the reign, it was the coronation of it was this
Yeah,
event, it was this thing. It's a way that people have of marking time the way we used to say, oh yeah, it was at harvest time. It was in
right.
the, that sort of thing. It was planting season.
Well,
Uh,
I tell people that I always go to whenever, if it's any way possible, I always go to crown tournaments and coronations.
yeah,
I have rarely missed one. And someone asked me one time, well, are you going to crown? Oh, yeah, of course you're going to crown. You always go to crown, even whether I'm fighting or not. And I always go to coronations, whether I'm
yeah,
stepping up or stepping down, doesn't matter. It's because I think, and I told them that those events are the breath and heartbeat of the kingdom.
yeah.
They mark the rhythm of our history.
And this is, I mean, we are not presenting this as an extended commercial for the organization
No, no.
either, but just this is a way that we have found something that called to us, which is why we became active participants in it. And but it also had a benefit of friendships and
Yeah.
acquaintances. And I did once explain to somebody that think of a castle. If you know, a castle is not just a tower. Castle has there's an outer wall, there's a courtyard, there's an inner wall, there's a more space, there's a the inner keep. Well, those are you can liken those to layers of acquaintance,
Yeah.
friendship, close friendship. Who do you let in all the way? And some,
And who do you lock out when you're being invaded?
right. And so there's some people who, um, I remember telling somebody, I said, you have an enormous number of people in that outer courtyard, but you're alone in your keep. You don't let anybody in that close.
Yeah. Well,
And
I bet there is a bomb shelter analogy out there somewhere too.
oh, probably, yeah, yeah, which always takes me back to a Twilight Zone episode that freaked me out when I was a kid because it was about the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there was this
Oh
Twilight
yeah.
Zone episode of you know, sirens going off, attack is imminent, and the one family that had built the bomb shelter were going in and people were trying to break in and people were fighting each other. And then it was false alarm. Yeah.
Yep. What did that do to your community?
Yeah, exactly. Um, well, there were a number of Twilight Zone episodes about paranoia and suspicion and in
I
community.
I
Yeah.
remember reading in like seventh grade the monsters are coming to Maple Street.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't remember
That
who
was a
wrote.
Twilight Zone episode. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, before I even sort of realized what the Twilight Zone, before the Twilight Zone came out in syndication again when I was older. Um, but yeah, that,
The monsters are due on Maple Street.
oh, okay.
Season 1, episode 22. Um, the Twilight Zone.
But it was based on a
Um,
short story by somebody else, not Rod Serling.
the episode was written by Rod Serling, it says here.
Hmm. Well,
Um, huh? So
well,
they start essentially what they do is they start suspecting each other,
right, right.
but it's it's actually an experiment by aliens to create paranoia and see what happens. They're planning to conquer Earth one neighborhood at a time by sowing suspicion and doubt. Hmm, how how relatable is that
Uh-huh.
to maybe like election interference, which or the suspicion of it, which sows paranoia
Yeah.
and paranoia about vaccines, paranoia about yeah. So yeah, prescient. Um, it says, the human condition remains friendship and community different, because but related, um, important, really
Yeah.
important.
Well, I mean, community is, and when community breaks down, we get kind of where we are now.
Yeah.
Um,
The lone gunman who shoots up a
well,
place,
this,
is often an isolated, no friends, lacking friends kind of.
well, there was also we have in this country as with other as like the lone lawman standing against the gang. We also have this sort of myth, and to a greater or less extent, maybe mythical, but the the lone pioneer,
Yeah,
striking out, and yeah, the pioneers moved in community groups.
yeah,
The single family in a Conestoga wagon finding a little valley and setting up a farm and making it on their own is pretty mythical.
yeah,
They would follow trails that existed and were known. They would go to places that were already established by a group of people would go and establish
yeah,
it. And then slowly other families would trickle out to it and they would expand the community and grow more food. But they were isolated, but they weren't entirely cut off
right.
from
They,
everything else.
yeah, they had a community.
Right. And they had stores and they had,
Yeah,
you know, telegraph offices and, you know, you might live on your little farm that was, a half day's walk from the center of town, but everybody in that town knew you
yeah,
and you
yeah,
knew, the other farmers around you and you'd get together, they'd have dances.
yeah,
They do barn raisings, that kind of thing. Um, so even this idea of the pioneer spirit of self-reliance and being independent and living off the land and all that stuff. Yeah, there's the kernel of truth that every myth grows out of is there. And it's certainly, more isolated than we would think of ourselves now. But it wasn't this total isolation where you're doing everything for yourself. You still went and bought coffee somewhere,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, you weren't growing or hunting everything you ate. There were still
Right.
supplies you got and traded for. And um, you mentioned self-sufficient, self-reliant. I was explaining to somebody that the idea of individual responsibility is does not mean just being responsible for yourself. It means
Right.
also being responsible for your family, your community, your
Yeah,
fellow citizens, your country, the world, your species, the planet, it grows from that. If it's only about you, it's not it's not individual responsibility, it's self-centeredness,
sure.
solipsism. So, which I always think of the wall graffiti I saw once that said solipsists unite. So, um, so I didn't, we certainly don't have a solution to the friendship recession, but it's certainly worth offering to the idea to people to look for something. Don't just endure isolation, you know,
Well, I was
and
talking with my
yeah,
wife about this, and reading the article, and partly because another point in there, and we can get back to in a second, was the fact that men in particular are seeing this. And you
yes,
mentioned that in the statistic earlier on, that men in particular are losing, or their circles of friends are contracting to very small or non-existent
yeah,
units. Um, and that, however, that men in relationships with women, the women tend to, or at least statistically, the women are carrying the sort of social calendar.
yes.
Um,
The
and I found that interesting.
emotional labor of they are being the friend. They're being not only the spouse, but the friend. Well, yeah, my wife and I are friends. We were friends before we started dating and got married.
Right.
And we still are friends. But yeah, that's if all of that falls to the one spouse, it's that imbalance in the labor can be damaging to a relationship too.
Well, but I think that there's within that same statistic, there's those kinds of friendship relationships tend to be more important to women in general, so that guys will retreat into their house, into their castle,
Yeah,
and not worry too much about what's going on with their other friends in their castles. You know,
but they still think that they are friends. God, I know
well,
you
exactly.
can not see somebody for years and you see them and you just pick up where you left off and like
Right.
nothing's changed. So the work of maintaining a friendship relationship um, is ignored or
Well,
assumed to not need work or is left to the women to do.
but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's not being shoved off. It's just
Yeah.
not viewed as an important component to maintaining friendships. We don't, and I'm super generalizing here, of course, but
Yeah.
men, as you say, men don't need constant contact to remain friends. Women, more often than not, want to keep up, like to maintain that through more, uh, more, what's the word I want?
Frequent?
More, yes, there you go. More frequent contact.
I don't think that's necessarily um I know that's kind of traditional and but I don't think that's true for it's certainly not true for everybody.
Well,
And
no, like I said, I was completely
yeah,
generalizing, but you see it pretty. I've seen it pretty regularly.
I think what's more significant probably is that um then again going back to the study that I was mentioning, women are often more successful at making close friendships and men less so. Men making maybe more, um, um, not distant, less close, more friendships, but they're less close, and women maybe fewer friends, but closer, um,
Perhaps
perhaps. Um,
that would jive with my experience,
yeah,
certainly.
yeah.
Um,
Um, I think there are also, and I've known this to be true from women friends who have had trouble making other women friends and find
mm,
that, but it's so this is a problem with generalizing because there are always exceptions. I've known men who have trouble making friends with men, but can be friends with women easier, and some
yeah.
who have no women friends, who don't, and yeah, it comes down to individuals. There's certainly trends, and the trend, as we've been talking about, is for the friendship circle of men to have been contracting over the years, and it's a problem. And again, for all the social, structural, societal reasons that we've been talking about, that's have been leading to that.
Well, and what I was going leading toward with that, I derailed myself, but what I was leading toward was that when um, Tracy and I, my wife, were talking, I thought, well, hobbies are another potential avenue for making expanding your circle of friends. And I
Hmm.
don't mean hobbies like, and I think this is another thing. There used to be things like bridge clubs
Yeah.
and poker nights and things like that, where and you pointed out earlier that men tend to be sort of activity oriented when they gather,
Hmm.
and women, more often than not, are just happy to just gather over wine or a book club
Yeah.
or something like that.
Cards uh, work really well for that because it's an activity, but it also gives you time to talk. That I remember my aunt and uncle would have a card night,
Yeah.
and my folks would drop me off there, and because then they could go do something. My parents could go do something, and the women were in one room playing canasta, and the men were in another room playing pinochle, with cigars.
Yeah, of course.
and and so I remember I was single digit young, and I would go back and forth between the rooms observing and listening to the conversations,
Yeah,
and I found it um enlightening. Uh, but I mean, that was a generation, that was a
sure.
older generation, and how they interacted um, with each other. Um, and it was interesting because Pinochle was considered a man's card game, and Canasta was considered a women's card game.
That's interesting. My grandparents would play pinochle at the least suggestion. They would break out decks of cards, and it was. I mean, they knew, and I suspect most people from that generation they knew and were reasonably skilled at half a dozen different card games.
Yeah.
It could be played with two or four or five or six people. Um,
Well, I think there's another thing that, and it's interesting because Dungeons and Dragons just celebrated its 50th anniversary.
and has seen a huge resurgence in the
Yes.
last 15, 20 years.
Well, and yeah, and the reason for that, I think, is there's been the availability. There's been some streaming shows like Critical Role and
Yeah.
others that have done that and do it really well. And that's I I'm in a campaign right now.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, and it's it's fun. And the um, backstory I created for my character was really involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of mythology and stuff going on, but everybody in the party did that, and so there's a lot of socialization that goes on in that. It's really fun. And you ran a game years ago.
Yeah.
You ran several that I really enjoyed. Um,
I've been thinking about doing it again just because I think we need to get more use out of our medieval room.
yeah, and there's I think that's a social act. That the reason I did I because I played many years ago, and it was the social aspect of it that
Yeah.
really intrigued me. And I think that it's a group activity because it is, if you approach it the right way, it's not a game. You're not competing against each other. You are collaborating on a story. It's a
Yeah.
group storytelling. You're making it together. And if the,
And there's some cooperative problem solving
yeah,
and
absolutely. So
yeah.
it's an activity, but there's conversation, there's stuff, and I think that's another thing that I think is is good to do. Right. And it's different, I think, from online gaming
Oh, absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
it's in person. Um, there's something it's funny that phone the ability to make a video call with your phone on the iPhone anyway is called FaceTime.
Hmm.
But FaceTime, having FaceTime with somebody was an idea in work that if you were going to collaborate with somebody at a distance, it was really useful to start off with a meeting, a face-to-face meeting,
Sure.
FaceTime, so that you could then, if you got an email from them, you could hear it in their voice. You could understand their inflection. You could understand because what they really meant, because a lot of people don't write, they don't communicate in writing the nuance that you can pick up when listening to them. And so it's still useful. And we were just talking about this, that going in, if you go into work, not just remotely, but go into work at least a couple of days, it's useful for getting that face time, growing in a career, doing that. Companies that are all remote all the time have developed other ways like Slack, which is a communication application, um, having channels for interests like knitting and model
No.
trains, and puppies, and other things, so that you can find your people.
Hmm.
And um, so the uh, book I just published is a history of a improv, longest running student improv and comedy group in the country, also celebrating its 50th anniversary.
Hmm.
And the people in it have stayed friends, many of them for decades, have but also collaborated professionally. And there was a big reunion event in April, and it was just astonishing to see the depth of emotion from people
Hmm.
about this thing. And one person, more than one person in particular, I was thinking of, said, I found this group and I knew I'd found my people. And it's important to find your people. Find those people who are your tribe, your family of choice, your those people who understand the way you think and appreciate it. And I think that that's important to do.
I agree, but I also think there is utility in getting out of that
Yeah.
group
Oh,
once in
yeah.
a while
Yeah.
too.
Meeting other people who you don't want to be just in a bubble of people
Right.
who only think the way you do. Um, I actually went out of my way to have a conversation with somebody who um, we disagreed about about something, and it's like, well, we're say friendly acquaintances,
Yeah.
and so we had a lengthy conversation. I was not convinced by their um, feelings, and they were not convinced by my facts. Put it that way. Um, so, but it was worth. I think it was worth. Still think it was worth doing because the more isolated we get, the other side effect of that is we tend to demonize people who are
Right.
isolated from. Um, so
Well, have we gotten to the end of this, do you think?
I think so. I don't know.
There wasn't, like you said, we're not offering solutions, but we're just recognizing
Yeah,
this thing that was written about, and I think it's certainly something um, to keep in mind.
yeah.
I think being on the lookout for opportunities to expand your um, circle of acquaintance, at least.
Yes.
Um,
People start as acquaintances and then can become friends.
yeah, yeah, but you need a pool of
Yeah,
acquaintances to
yeah,
draw friends from.
yeah.
Um, and and I've thought about this myself recently. There was another aspect, and I don't know if maybe we haven't gotten the end of this now. There's another aspect in the article that you.
Is this digression number 12?
It's not digression.
Yeah.
It's looping back.
Oh,
We're
oh,
looping back.
callback.
So
Okay.
when we were talking, I mentioned about uh, women are more typically carrying the social calendar and maintaining those contacts, birthday parties and that kind of thing, and
Mhm.
scheduling that stuff. Um, they are. There's also a trend noticed in this article about how there seems to be social pressure for making your partner your one and only bestest friend. Um,
Yeah.
and so that you draw more closely together at the expense of outside friendships and larger groups of friends.
I think that, yes. And unfortunately, that puts an undue burden on the other person.
Right. And that was,
And
yes,
I
in the
think that
article it said.
it also, it can also be a control mechanism.
Yeah, in a worse
Am I not
scenario.
enough for you? Sort of thing. But I think that I truly, um, looking for the word, adults, two adults who know themselves and are therefore able to have an honest relationship with each other
Sure.
and a strong, solid relationship with each other, recognize that each other can have interests and tastes that they don't have to share and like and
Right.
can do other things. Um, and as long as you're communicating,
Yeah.
hey, I want to go do this thing that I know you don't like, but I really like it. Okay, go and have a good time.
Yeah.
And you don't have to share everything. You don't have to be the one and only everything,
Right.
as long as you are the core thing, the core of the
Yeah,
relationship,
exactly.
right?
Well, and
Yeah,
the way I expressed it to my wife was actually that she's my there's nobody I would no individual I would rather spend time with,
yeah,
right? However, in a social situation, there is always, and I'm not saying this is bad, it just is that if we're in a social situation and I'm talking to some people and she's talking to other people, there is always a part of me that is saying, is she having a good time? What is
yeah,
she doing? Is she sitting by herself? Is she talking to people? Is she ready to leave? How long have we been here? Is this past her bedtime? Is she getting tired? Do I need to wrap this up? That's always in my
yeah.
mind. When we are separate, when I'm doing one social thing and she's doing something else, I don't have that. And I can have a better time sometimes.
Well, I think there's a variation on that, that, we may go somewhere together, but if it's a professional function, we've each for each other been the the professional spouse in
Yeah, right, sure.
professional situations, and understand that the person, the one of us whose professional situation is,
The principle for that.
has to work the room in a way.
Hmm.
The spouse has to work the room in a different way, a supportive way. You have to,
Right,
and understanding understanding that. And so it's different. We're supporting each other, but we can take turns doing that. It's there's an old saying in jazz, sometimes you play lead and sometimes you play the side.
right,
An old a jazz combo would, everybody starts playing together, and then somebody takes off on it for a while, and then it shifts to another player and another, and then they all come back together at the end. Um, and sometimes you do that, and it's like, yeah, and that's fine if you are secure in who you are. You're not threatened
right,
by the other person's professional or social relationships or activities.
right.
You make space for those because they're part of the person you are in a relationship, the person you love. So you honor what they want to do.
Right. And it's like you say, you trade off.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
we're going to do this thing. I'm happy to do this thing because you enjoy it so much.
Right.
I can, I can play second fiddle or I can hang out over here and not, get in your way while you're doing your thing. I'm happy to do that as long as that's not, as long as that is not my role all the time.
Well, as long as it's not one-sided.
Exactly. Well,
And
that's what I mean.
I think that the problem with this is the one and only person is usually the person who's insisting on that has other things to do as well. And
Oh,
usually the man, and they're saying, yeah, but you can't have any friends, and you can't have, or telling a man he can't have any women friends, or a woman she can't have any men friends, or
right. Or you can't, well, and this kind of goes both ways. You can't go out to the bar with your friends without me
right.
because there's going to be other people there and there's an insecurity at the
Yeah.
root of all of that.
Thanks, Yoko Ono.
So, yeah, that was just another thing I wanted to mention that's
Yeah.
part of this contracting of friendship circles is that there's an encouragement, I think, a modern or a current encouragement or an expectation that your partner can be everything or should be everything to you and the center of your universe, and you should be satisfied just being with them. You don't need anyone else.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't think that's necessarily modern. I think there are older romanticized ideas of relationships that held that to be true as well. And I don't, yeah. So, um,
Well, I think those older tropes sort of feed what I see in social media as kind of a modern movement. But
yeah,
yeah, it's certainly older.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't need anyone but you. Kind of a,
Thank you.
eh, well, clearly.
I think we have covered this, and I think my hope is that maybe people will, who haven't thought about this, will think about it and maybe stretch a little, reach out.
Yeah.
Um,
Join a club, find an
yeah,
activity, do
yeah,
pickleball,
yeah, something. Yeah,
something.
thing. Yeah,
Bowling alleys are closing all over the place. Patronize your local.
yeah. A book club, a
Yeah.
because you read it and then you discuss it, and that
Yep. There's
sort
some
of
mental exercise there.
yeah, exactly.
Reading a book, for God's sake.
Yeah, yeah, uh, yeah.
I wonder about other hobbies like, you know, guys that do modeled railroading and stuff. Like,
Well, and there's certain hobbies that are the doing the thing is a solitary thing, but then you meet with other people who have the same interest. I was at the zoo some months ago, and there was a display of bonsai,
okay.
and the uh, and it was guys, it was older guys, and they were really into it. And some of these plants they made were amazing, just beautiful in their own way. And I asked a bunch of questions because I was curious about it because I'm curious about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And they were really into it. And um, yeah, something, find a thing. And I think you said it before, find a thing that really interests you and do it until you get really good at it. That's something you've said before.
hmm
Agree.
that's it goes
Yeah.
back to the SCA, but that's
Yeah.
the secret to getting anything you want in an organization. First, number one thing is find the thing you like to do and get really, really good at it.
And I heard a variation of that. Um, and it was don't follow your passion and, and expect to get good at it. Find a thing that you can get good at, and getting good at it, it will become your passion.
hmm
I thought that was really interesting. That, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Find your aptitude is what I like
yeah,
to think of it as.
yeah,
Don't follow your passion, follow your aptitude,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it can become a passion.
yeah, exactly. So,
There,
okay,
pithy
well,
wisdom from
yeah.
the everyday knight.
So, um, please don't be isolated. Um,
No,
extend yourself. It can be really difficult, particularly for those of us who may have some introvert tendencies. I call myself an ambivert. There are times when I'm an introvert and times when I'm an extrovert, but find something.
I'm an introvert. I'm just really, really good at overcompensating.
Yeah. So find something. Community theaters always want people to work on sets and do stuff there, and you can make friends.
Vol Volunteer
Yeah,
for a charity.
volunteer. Absolutely. So, so, um,
And while you're expanding, please share our little bits of wisdom.
yes,
Like, hit that like button. Um,
join this discussion by telling us what you want us to discuss.
yeah, we are always looking for more topics.
Yeah.
So,
So, so until we see you next time, be thou
a good night.
and true.